Hey everybody, Sujin Patel here of Mailshake. I've got Dustin from Intercom, and I'm super pumped. We've had a lot of kind of closed door conversations, Dustin, over the last probably year or so. But I'm really excited to talk to you on and really pick your brain on lessons from scaling in Intercom's outbound sales team. Dustin, thanks, man. Maybe you can just quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation. I have been building some outbound teams, in my past. So this is actually my second team that I'm actually building out. So a little bit of a background about me. So I am Dustin Crawford. I've built a outbound sales team over at BaseCRM, which a lot of people probably now know it as Zendesk Sell. And now I'm actually building out and scaling Intercom's outbound team. And I'm excited to share some of that knowledge and what we've been doing over here.
Awesome. Isn't it fun doing something the second time around? You're like, oh, I made all these mistakes. Like, here's the faster way to get through there, right?
So much easier and a lot of less confusion and just more of like a game plan. You can get things done much quicker. At this time around, it didn't take me as long. Last time, I think the first time around, it took me about 6 to 8 months to really figure this out. Now it really kind of condensed it to literally the first month was like a huge turnaround because we were dabbling in it when we first started. Now we kind of spun it and really put some power behind it and have the right folks and the right tools in place to be able to grow it in just like a month or two.
Awesome. I love it. So one of the things I just want to give everyone who's listening or watching a disclaimer is like, we're not going to talk about copy and specific cadences and all that stuff. We're going to talk about, I think, more structural and more deeper parts to this, like building the team. And I think the stuff that you probably don't read about or hear about as often. So if you're looking for cadences, just go visit our blog. You can get a lot of that stuff, right? We want to talk about like people, process, all the other stuff. So with that being said, Dustin, what are the most important factors if you're starting an outbound team?
Yeah, so I think some of the biggest and the most important things is having the right team in place. I think that you have to really have folks who have the mindset, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I think that that's like a real big piece. Then we have the efficiency. So the most important thing besides the right people is having the right system and tools in place to be efficient as possible, because you have to have as much activity. When you think about outbound, you really think about this in the numbers game and really kind of like understanding how many dials it takes to be able to book a meeting, or how many emails, or how many accounts. And so you really have to start to like play with the numbers to understand, like, are we being efficient enough where the team can be productive? And then the last one is just process. Process is super important because these are junior reps. They're not too sure of exactly what to do, when to do things. And so it just really helps to drive the efficiency piece.
Gotcha. And so I want to dig into two parts of this. You said the team. Do you have an ideal structure in mind?
Yeah, so I actually look at two different components when actually hiring folks. So I think it's extremely important, especially because we're in a world that you have to be more consultative and have that consultative approach. So I look at two things: grit and intelligence. So when I first started sales, I was the grit guy. I'm like, hey, I'm going to go out there every single day. I'm going to make 120, 30 dials, and I'm going to be the best that I could possibly be. And I was a bulldog. But now in the modern day, like, people want to have personalization. They want you to know something about them and their business. So you really have to have that intelligence piece, but you can't have one without the other. So this is really where you have to try to find the right people who are going to come in every single day to put in that work, because it's hard, right? It's hard mentally to get into that frame of mind month over month, because you might not be able to get to quota until at the last day of the month. So you need to have someone that's going to persevere to wake up the next morning and say, I'm going to do it all over again, and making, the 60 to 80 dials and, sending out 30 to 50 emails. That's a really hard thing to do, and being rejected all the time. But then you just need to have someone that is, the intelligent enough to be able to be creative and creating new and different type of content that's going to help and to kind of carry your team from, let's just say 8 meetings to 12 meetings. And you need to be able to have those right people to kind of keep moving forward in the right direction.
Love it. And when you say, so grit, I love that. And then intelligence, but specifically roles wise. So would it be like a couple SDRs, an AE, a sales manager? Like what's like, you know, if you're just starting off, you're starting with a few person outbound team, who would be the specific roles or positions?
This is a great question. And I think this is something that I find out in the Bay is especially is that people try to always avoid outbound, especially account executives, because if account executives are getting fed inbound, they're going to be like, no, I'm not going to be doing outbound. And so it just becomes something that is just the company's initiative is, but yet the company or the sales reps are not doing and they're not implementing it. And they're just kind of doing a half-ass, if you will. So what you really need to do is have some hyper focus, having one or two reps to kind of like start off. And, you know, if you're a smaller company, you know, starting off with a couple reps just to see and have almost like a proof of concept to be able to see, like, is there something there? Is there a market for what we're doing outbound? And then start to scale from there. We're very fortunate over here at Intercom. We're able to build out the team just because we know that there's a market for what we have here.
Love it. We talked offline about some things I want to bring back up, which is the first 6 months, right? I imagine it's crazy. What's the first like? There's no, you know, first 6 months you're trying to figure out if it works, right? What's the first 6 months look like?
Yeah, the first 6 months is like this wild west period. And so the first 6 months is really important because you are still trying to figure the market out. You're trying to figure out what the content that you're going to put out there, what accounts you're going to put out there. And so this is something where you're just like in this big testing phase. And so we'll talk about kind of just in general, one of the things, I'll bring it up now. One of the biggest mistakes, and you were kind of alluding to it because I know that you're starting this process as well. One of the biggest mistakes that I started to learn, or when I was getting feedback from some of the executives of telling me what the accounts that we should go after, a lot of the accounts that they wanted me to go after was what's coming inbound. That was probably my biggest mistake, is to understand what was coming inbound. You can use that as maybe like a point in the right direction, but if you take that for face value, then outbound is not going to work. Outbound is a completely different beast. So what's coming inbound is not necessarily your outbound strategy. And so you really need to understand like data and being able to look at these little different attributes to understand like, okay, what is first and foremost going to help me break into an account to get a meeting? And then you start to look in a little bit further to see if it's actually, what are these accounts look like, not only to break in, but also to purchase from us. Then you take it further and further of, the value of them and so on and so forth. But I think it's super important to start to look at these little attributes to be able to help you identify these right accounts, because what happens is a lot of people and this is from my experience from both companies that I work with, is that we were taking the guidance of inbound. But what happens is we're startup companies in the tech world. So where is this going to like resonate first and foremost for inbound? It's going to be the East and the West Coast. So when you have both of those, that's basically your primarily inbound. So when I looked at our top companies from Intercom, it was pointing me into software companies. But you have the whole Midwest, because they were in the, there was a little in Chicago, there's a little, in New York, and a mass amount in California. But there's the whole middle part of the United States. And so I think first and foremost, like you got to look at these different things. And so going back to your question is, you got to start with the Wild West feature and functions of like this process to be able to understand like, okay, what are the accounts? How can I look at these leading identifiers to be able to build a strategy to work on the accounts? And then same thing with your team. So the first bit of your team, I build out kind of like a structure for the team and say like, here's a very loose playbook, and here's high level content that we should be sending out. These are the personas. This is what you should say to these personas, but we don't even know what's going to resonate with the market yet. So I let my reps kind of tweak it and have that creativity to be able to speak to me about like, hey, these are the things that are working. Because what happens is like one rep will have a solid second email that's working, that's providing a lot of meetings for them. And then another rep could have their third or fourth email, generating a lot of meetings as well. So we come and we collaborate together to understand like, okay, what is working? And you try to meet with your team as often as you possibly can to be able to start to build out this playbook. And so it's a lot of work, but it's actually, for me, I thoroughly enjoy it just because it's something that's super hard. A lot of companies and people struggle with this. And this is kind of like, it's just trying to figure out really the path for each company, because every company is different, right? And their message. So that to me is the foundational piece that I start off with in the first 6 months, and then you start to build out that playbook from there.
Nice. Yeah, it's awesome that something brand new I've never heard of is that your inbound leads aren't the same as your outbound. I mean, who you go after, and you're right, like the West and East, there's a lot in the middle that you don't get targeted, and there are like lots of viable big companies. They don't have to be in tech or whatever. Well, I want to switch gears a little bit, talking about personalization and kind of balancing the automation personalization. I guess, what's your take on this? I mean, obviously you can go super personalized and every single thing you do is personalized. You can systemize it. I guess, is there anything from, building 2 outbound teams? Have you lessons learned or anything you would do now that you've done it twice over?
Yeah, lots of learnings here. I think that the biggest thing that you want to focus on is those key attributes that you started to kind of identify with the accounts that you're going after. Mm-hmm. The reason why that you're booking meetings with those, because you'll start to see trends. It could be technology that they're currently using, right? Some out to date, some inefficiencies that you identify, or there's some kind of like trend with like industries that you're going after that you identify that there's maybe an opportunity for something new. And so when you have something that's that high level, you start to see a trend of maybe where we can fit in, and you just kind of like lightly touch on that, because they're probably talking about these things behind closed doors. So, and what you're starting to do is you're starting to come up with personalization at scale, because you understand that there is a problem out in the market, and you're identifying that one thing at a very high level to try to capture their attention. And so I think that a lot of SDRs spend a lot of time looking at a website and trying to nail that first message. That's not the goal. The goal is to get your name out there with a very solid message, in a cadence form. And you personalize just a little bit. So that's the reason why that every single rep should have a formula of like, what am I going to put in my first sentence? And then what am I going to button it up with? And it should go to each persona as well. So like our reps have each persona that we're going after, and we're having our high level message. And then that is going to be personalized enough until we actually speak to someone within the company, or we get a little nugget back from those initial emails to be able to personalize a little bit more. So I think that it's really important for you to understand what that formula is and how do you keep it high level. And so I think for me, you find out that one little nugget, and what that is, it is like what I mentioned, it's the inefficiency or the problem that you're trying to solve. That is your first line, and then how you solve it is the second line, and then you button it up. I mean, that is as simple as it should be.
I love it. I think personalization is overanalyzed, and people think it is a critical thing. It is a key element of getting the deal, getting the open, getting the positive response, or getting the meeting book. But it's really that, like you said, like finding that one thing that can be applied to many, or many things. And I'm assuming in the first 6 months, you guys are all testing different personalization, right?
Exactly. So what we try to do is we try to understand from the conversations that we're having with folks, what we do better than the other technologies that are out there. And this is where we start to understand, like, what is a hot button for each of these folks that we're going after. And this is kind of like where it goes back to the accounts that you work, because you've got to identify, okay, all the companies that we just booked meetings with, what are some commonalities? And then you put on, and you keep track of like the technology that they're currently using to understand, like, hey, there probably is some type of pain or inefficiencies with the ones that we're going after. Now we can actually figure that out and just keep going at it and find other companies that have similar technologies to keep going, but you personalize based off of what you uncovered. So it's like, hey, we understand that you're using this, and this is how Intercom can actually solve, and what we can do and how we can do it better. And I think that like just keeping it that simple and that broad, because people are having these conversations behind closed doors, that it's going to trigger something where it's like, yeah, you're right. But you need to have like, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth step because they're not going to respond back probably like the first email. Some will, because if it's such a hot pain that they're currently facing, they're like, and they've already talked about it behind closed doors, and said, you know what, we need to change something because it's not working for us. Then you got them. But sometimes it's bruised over a couple weeks or a month before they respond back, but they know that maybe now there's something better out there because you hit their hot button.
That makes complete sense. I want to switch gears a little bit, talking about overcoming objections. Any advice on overcoming objections via email and or phone? I imagine those are completely different things, but anything to add there?
Yeah, so I think this is something that is always like a work in progress. I think that a lot of folks get a rejection via email and they just leave it at that. And so I think that this is something where you really need to start to like story tell and keeping it high level. This is something that I practice with my team quite a bit to understand, like, how do you story tell without telling and kind of like pitching your product? Because the first reaction that we always want to do with any type of objection is, hey, no, I don't want to take a meeting with you. And we're like, but we could do blah, 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 blah. And it's like, that's overwhelming for them. They need to actually see the light. Their instant mind goes to, I don't want to talk to this person. It's not relevant to me. So you need to be able to come up with some type of story. So emailing, it's storytelling. So for us, I'll give you an example of something that we do here. So because it kind of resonates with people and they can kind of understand this because of the trends of what's going on in the market and how people are communicating. So one of the biggest things that we try to talk about and try to educate, so if someone's using a contact form and they're trying to use a live, or they haven't thought about live chat and they're like, no, this is not it. This is not it for us. It's more of storytelling, be like, hey, your web traffic, each one of your visitors that are coming to your site, go to 3 to 5 competitors before even filling out your contact form. And so what we want to do is we want to capture them right off the bat. So having that little bit of a story to maybe make them see the light of like what is going on and why they need to do this today really kind of paints a better picture for them. And so it kind of like leads them to water, if you will. Now for phone calls, it's, you're basically strapping on your battle helmet and you're going to war and you've got a lot of different ammunitions going for you. So because you could storytell, you can kind of like paint that picture for them to be able to make them see what's possible. But sometimes that doesn't really work out for you because you're trying to like hit on, let's just say one of our products is, live chat. But if you're talking to a salesperson, they're going to point you to marketing. They're like, that's a marketing thing. It has to do with our website. But then you ask like a simple question, because the story doesn't work and your initial pitch didn't work. And so now you have to like pivot. And so you've got to learn how to pivot and, an objection handle in a different way. Because again, you don't spew what we could do in all the different bells and whistles. It's asking them a simple question. Hey, are you more focused on inbound or outbound? So you know exactly why you're asking that question because you know where it's going to lead you. They go, well, our focus now is on outbound. Well, now that's great for us because now we can actually pitch our ABM solution of saying like, hey, you're doing all this effort of trying to go outbound and trying to put out your message, but do you even know if any of those people come to your website? And that's kind of like the missing key to a lot of outbound because you're doing all that work and you don't know if they're coming on there kind of like poking around because that's where all of your content is leading them is back to the website. If you don't know that, then you're losing out. And so what we're able to do is kind of like talk to them about, hey, this is what we're trying to solve for. And now you've got them from saying no to saying yes by one simple question to help them understand like, hey, we could do other things, but in a conversational way.
Awesome. I love that. Yeah, it makes complete sense. And it's sounds like you start the conversation that way to better deal with the objections before they even happen, right?
Exactly. And it's just really about pivoting with very thoughtful questions, but thoughtful questions that and how it's going to lead you into your next product or your next solution that you offer. Because that person, the reason why you're calling that person is because of something. That person could say, no, I'm not in charge, or no, I don't have time. Those are all objections that you face. But if you know that that's just because something that's triggering their mind, they're like, I don't want to talk about it. This is probably not relevant to me. But you help them make them kind of identify like this is relevant to me by asking simple questions to make them talk a little bit more about something that's specific to them.
Makes sense. Yeah. And so you kind of get them to put themselves in their shoes of what this could look like as well, right? Like
Exactly.
or
So
like
a lot,
understand the problem that they actually have.
exactly, because a lot of people, they don't know what problem they currently have. So
Yeah.
when you call in there, you could say, hey, I have a better solution, we're blah blah blah, we're better than, you know, all your competitors, and they're like, great, that doesn't mean anything to me. But that's why you have to story tell just a little bit to show them, like, hey, we can actually solve this problem, or this is what's going on in the market, to help them realize, like, oh, you're right. Or when they said I'm not the right person, help them realize that they are the right person. So when someone says that they're from sales, that they're not the right person, you know, they keep leading you to marketing, and you're like, oh, so this is a simple question. Oh, so what I'm hearing from you is you don't have any input of like what happens on the website. So if something happens, like, you basically don't do that. So, you know, you don't get more leads. And they're like, oh, no, 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 wait, no, 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 no. I play a part in that. You know, if they do something on the website that's going to affect my leads coming through, I do want to say. So you kind of catch them in a way that's conversational. That's not, you know, being too forceful of, you know,
Yeah.
being a jerk or anything like that. You're just trying to better understand you. It's just like, hey, I'm just curious, you know. And I think that that's what we find to strike up more conversations, to make them realize. And so it's just kind of like that. It's a fine balance, you know. And so sometimes it's hard to say these things on the spot when you're talking to someone. That's why you should have a game plan. You should have, like, these are common objections, and this is how I'm going to pivot. You know, kind of have like that framework, like a lucid chart, if you will.
Oh, interesting. So let's talk about that for a second. So you framework. Some people call it scripts or have very defined things. What do you do? Do you have like is it just a complete script for people with like here's the different objections you can go down, or yeah, what do you do or prefer?
Yeah, good question. So I think it's personas. So you have got the different personas that you're going after, and the common objections that you get from each. Excuse me. So then when you have like the different personas and the different objections that you probably get from each, now you can start to build out a game plan of, like, here's my objections that I usually commonly get, and this is kind of like how I'm going to overcome them. And or this is the way I'm going to pivot the conversation to, well, I just pitched live chat twice with them, it didn't land, but now I'm going to pivot, especially if it's a salesperson. I'm going to pivot and asking them a simple question of, like, hey, are you focused on inbound or outbound, so I can go to ABM. If it's a marketing person, you know, we're going to talk about live chat, but then we're probably going to pitch something what's called our product tours for onboarding. So now we have like different avenues and different outs to be able to see, like, because these things you're trying to poke around to understand, like, what's maybe top of mind right now. Live chat might not be, but guess what? For marketing, but maybe onboarding is. Same thing with sales. Maybe they're trying to do outbound and they just don't know how this actually works because they don't even know what's even out there. And that's kind of like what you need to start to do, because they will shut you down before you even get there if you just kind of like ramble and you say, you know, hey, Intercom can do X, da, 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 and then next thing you know, they're like, I'm so confused. So that's why you got to piece it apart as much as you possibly can.
I like that. Yeah, you have the different like kind of you're creating this lucid chart essentially, or like swim lanes based off of who you're talking to, the persona, products that fit that persona, objections, and all the other details that kind of come along with that route that persona can go down, which is awesome. I love that. So I want to wrap this up with really just so I asked you a lot of pointed questions around building an outbound team. Two final questions. One is, what's the time frame? You built it now, two outbound teams twice now. What's like the minimum time commitment to see results? Like what should, like, I'm the CEO of a business, I want to go invest in outbound. How long do I need to wait before I think this will work?
This is a great question. And I think that this is something that there's always a battle between SDRs and AEs. And so I think that there's always like this misconception that outbound isn't working, but when in reality it is. And let me kind of clarify this a little bit more. And this is why data is extremely important. And we kind of had this conversation before our call here today. This is something that you want to keep track of, because everybody always wants to point the fingers at SDRs. Oh, you're not finding me good leads or the right people and all this stuff. That could not be the case sometimes. So I want people to like take a step back real quick is, hey, you can find success in outbound And anywhere, I think 6 months is a great time frame. Depends on obviously the product that you're selling. If it's a higher value product, then it could take a little bit longer because your deal cycles are a little bit longer compared to other deal cycles. Outbound usually takes for deal cycles between 6 months into a year. So you want to make sure to kind of give yourself a good runway here. But I want to take a step back of kind of like what I was alluding to is a lot of times people think that outbound is not successful because they haven't closed deals. And they think that it's the SDRs, not finding the right people or the right companies. When you need to really document what is truly happening, because it might actually come down to some of the account executives who aren't really paying attention to outbound because they're harder. These are completely different opportunities than inbound. So when you start to do this muscle, you really need to focus on your account executives as much as you need to do your SDRs. Because if you're inbound focused and your AEs are focused on inbound opportunities, they're going to spend all their time on that because it's easier. So you really need to put something in place to make sure that the AEs are either compensated or you put some structure around the account executives and having some visualization of, okay, is it the AEs or is it the SDRs? Because sometimes it is the SDRs, providing good enough opportunities. Maybe they're almost like, bribing them, if you will, to take a meeting. And that's obviously not what we want. So you document it to see, okay, who is the SDR and who is the AE and what does this account look like? And by the way, are they currently evaluating technology of ours? Or kind of similar in the right sphere of what we're trying to sell here. That way, if you start to document all this, now you can understand, like, is it the SDR or is it the AE? And I think that will tell you a great story, because I've seen this in the past of blaming the SDR first, because that's what a lot of people like to do. It's the easy out. But in reality, a lot of times it falls on the account executives not working hard enough with these opportunities, because it does take a lot longer to get these deals into fruition.
That makes complete sense. Yeah. So I think a lot of people give up too quickly, is what I've seen, or at least experienced myself.
Yeah, and you know what it is? It's a lot of the account executives, they have that one phone call. They have that one phone call and they're like, I got some great stuff, but now I can't get a hold of that person. Well, that person was probably either a coach or someone in the company that took a meeting, saw that there could be like an opportunity here, and you didn't try to get meetings with other people in the organization to kind of like, get ahead of this. And so you still have a lot of work to do. You need to maybe do some outbound yourself within that account to be able to take that knowledge, what you learn, and be able to go forward. But it's also, it's another type of discovery. So it's a different discovery than people coming inbound. So you got to also educate them a little bit more on that piece as well.
That makes complete sense. So I asked you a lot of pointed questions about your lessons and kind of what you would do again and again, what we would do it again on building an outbound team. What didn't I ask you? Like, what are some lessons or things you've learned that just didn't have a question related to it?
So, no, it's always great. I think one of the biggest things, like I mentioned to you before, is the inbound versus outbound. That was probably the biggest lesson learned, and also keeping data. Data is the biggest thing for an outbound team. And I think that people only look at dials and emails, but there's so much more. When you talk about even like your reps, when you talk about call outcomes, because you could say, oh, this person is getting a hold of a lot of people, they're just not getting enough meetings. Well, that person might actually be getting a hold of the decision makers, but they're not able to close them. And so you want to look at that granular data to be able to see, like, hey, this person is getting a hold of people, they're doing the activity, and they're getting a hold of the right people. Now I just need to coach them to be able to objection handle a little bit differently, or be able to navigate a conversation in a different manner. And so just being that granular with your reps, because I think that will help and go a long way. But also, again, kind of looking at the top of the funnel to understand, like, what are the opportunities that we're going after, and what market, what geographic area. This starts to tell you and paints a great picture for you. So I'll tell you kind of my experience over at Base. One of the things was like, hey, software companies was coming inbound. Software, it was great. So, because we were getting a lot of software companies, but when we started doing outbound, it was super hard to break into these software companies because they already had something in place. A lot of these companies already had Salesforce. And so it was hard. So what we needed to look at, it was a lot of data and have like the Wild West. And so where the data started to point us was in the Midwest folks in company were blue collar companies that were not tech savvy. So they didn't have a Salesforce, or they had a laggard technology. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to find those folks, because they're looking to make a change. They were looking from either they don't have something to something, or they had something that was really old school and they wanted to go new school, or they went, they needed something mobile, because a lot of them, go to door. So those are the things that you start to look at. And I think that a lot of folks don't look that granular about the data that they're doing for outbound. They're just looking at it as like dials, and not actually going like a layer deep.
That totally makes sense. Awesome. Dustin, well, thank you for contributing and joining us on the virtual summit here. So for folks that want to learn more, or kind of maybe they have questions, what's the best place to get a hold of you?
Yeah, obviously one of the easiest places is obviously LinkedIn. You can find me, Dustin Crawford, and obviously I'm working over at Intercom. You can also just chime in, and actually do a live chat with me as well, to try to get forward over to me, with one of our inbound folks, to say like, hey, I'm interested in chatting with Dustin, and it's such an easy way to even communicate with me. And I think that those are probably the easy ways. And if you really want to talk about strategy, or talking about anything under the umbrella of SDRs, I love the topic. You can also email me at dustin.crawford@intercom.io.
Awesome. Thanks, Dustin, and have a good one.
You too. Thank you so much.
That was great, man. That was good stuff. I was trying not to jump in so that the video wouldn't go in on my end, show up with me for a second while you're talking. But yeah, that was awesome, man. Nothing to edit in the middle. I think it turned out great. Yeah, so dude, good stuff. Mark will be in touch with like promotional stuff, and we're planning on launching this in August 14th. So
Cool.
with some promo stuff going in advance, you'll get an email if you can tweet some stuff, or better yet, if you can get the marketing folks at Intercom to kind of share some stuff on social email, that'd be great.
Yeah, just let me know all that information and like dates and stuff like that, and then I'll just kind of like push forward and making sure that Courtney, Courtney and them, they're great, and if I push on them, they ask me, they ask. I'm probably one of the only managers that they keep asking. Like, I actually just got another email from Fiona, and just be like, hey, can you help me with like our playbook and all that stuff that we're writing? And so, I could probably push them in the right direction.
Awesome. Appreciate that. All right, Dustin, good talking, and we'll talk later. Bye.
Yeah, good luck on the summit, and I appreciate you asking me to do this. I love doing these. So
awesome.